Well, hello everyone. I wanted to come on today to do the continuation using the secret team. I've been not procrastinating. I've just been really busy doing other things. And Colonel has been really on me and I keep putting it off. But right now I'm going to complete chapter 9, reading it to y'all, and then probably move on to some other topics. So I apologize to Colonel Prouty, even though he's on the other side, for not being my word, because yesterday I said I was committed to, this is how you restore integrity. Yesterday I said I would be committed to reading this, finishing this chapter. However, I did not. My new commitment at this moment is to complete chapter 9 while in a recording. The chapter is The Coincidence of Crisis. We're on page 256 of the Secret Team, and we will begin now. Without too much red tape and delay, their figures and tactical proposals were accepted as part of the requirement of that demand and were inserted into the new budget planning. This is a slow process covering years of prodigious effort. But once this level of accomplishment has been achieved, the rest is practically automatic, and the opportunity to increase such figures from year to year is almost equally automatic. The timing of this sort of skillful surgery was just right, and the CIA made the most of it. The military, too, was getting swept up in this kind of thinking. It matched with some of the Cold War ideas. Gradually new to war planning that derived from new thinking about the role of nuclear weapons and from the urgent pressures of a new anti-communism. In the eloquent words of Adlai Stevenson, this was the time of a coincidence of crisis that brought together the flames of war, the atoms unlocking, and the emergence of aggressive communism. It was a time of a world torn by the predominance of military thought, not only by professional military men, but by scientists, professors, and other amateurs, and by the high emphasis placed on secrecy. Exactly what we're dealing with at this time. In this turmoil, the issue of secrecy was ultimately related to the issue of military control. This was the external mix of issues into which the CIA and later the ST maneuvered under the cloak of secrecy to enhance and greatly enlarge its control over elements in the military establishment. Elements that, with the growth of the ideas summoned up best by the word counterinsurgency, became dominant over the rest of the establishment. Who in the years from 1949 to 1955 would ever have visualized the use of the hydrogen bomb carrying strategic bombers and the Navy's nuclear carriers in a war in which the principal adversary was the little terrorized brown man in the forests of his wasted homeland? Yet this type of war was all but preordinated as the CIA gained increasing control over the military during the 50 years and early 60s through the tactics described above. A whole generation of military men trained, hardened, and honed by World War II experience believed in the principles of Clausewitz and others who stated that when diplomacy failed, it was time to go to war. But on the other hand, while diplomacy was being tested and while diplomacy was the name of the game, the military should do no more than plan and train for the possibility of war. The most warlike action that the military would be prepared to take during peacetime would be a show of force or an emergency relief action in some ravaged country. This was a convention. This is what that was overthrown by the new coincidence of crisis. Throughout the late 40s, a new wave of ideas began to spread, and some of these involved military plans and military utilization in peacetime. The idea of the Cold War was making peacetime seem more like a kind of warfare than previous conventional military planning had ever envisaged. For example, at Mitchell Field on Long Island, New York in 1949, a new commanding general directly returned from the post-war staff of General MacArthur in the Far East. General Ennis Whitehead called together the staff of his new command, the Continental Air Command, and in a brief, hard-hitting speech told them that they might have thought that the world was at peace, but that they were wrong. Every day, he said, the Russians were sending bombers into the skies of the Arctic, and every day they were coming closer to North America in the waves that, if not a direct threat, were at least a symbol of the threat that was always present. And day by day, American interceptor fighter pilots were being sent aloft to investigate these targets that appeared on radar. Someday, he said, and not too far in the future, of one of these young lieutenants is going to have to make a major decision. And they did. He's going to have to decide on his own up there in his lonely cockpit whether the bomber he has in his gun sights is made a hostile attack or an act of hostile intent, or whether he is only carrying out an acceptable training mission. Should the lieutenant decide that the Russian is hostile, he will be under standing orders to shoot, and he will knock down the Soviet bomber over North America. And that time World War III will not have begun, it will simply have reached its climax. In other words of General Whitehead, one of the outstanding air combat leaders of World War II and World War III was already underway, and none of those officers assembled to hear him should ever forget that. For those officers trained in the history of war and experienced in the fires of World War II, this was strong talk. Only a few months later, about half of those men present that day transferred with General Whitehead from Mitchell Field to Colorado Springs to set up a new air defense command. In so doing, every one of them knew that he was a member of an elite military unit that was already committed to victory in World War III. They knew that they were at war every day. All they were waiting for was the day when the Strategic Air Command would be given the same orders which they already had received and would join the war actively against the Soviet Union. All this book is real. Nonfiction is real. Of course, there was a tremendous difference between the missions of two commands. The battlefield of the Air Defense Command was limited to the skies over North America. The battlefield of the SAC was in foreign skies, but this type of thinking was changing ideas about the conventional role of the military in the nuclear age, and into the evolutionary period came the CIA and those of the military who specialized in what called to be an unconventional war, which is what we're in at this time, or the war against communist-inspired subversive insurgency. As discussed in my video yesterday, we're in a new type of political, which is a little bit of socialism mixed in with communism. It's called the democratic regime. High over Italy in a plushed up old World War II B-17 Flying Fortress, the man who was the chief of staff of the Air Force, the same man who had been the director of Central Intelligence just prior to the appointment of Admiral Hillenkoetter in May of 1947, General Hoyt S. Vandenberg wrote to his second in command a most significant letter. It has been preserved in Air Force files. It is quite distinctive because it is on a plain white paper and in the handwriting of General Vandenberg. Vandenberg, recalling his intelligence experience and thinking about the new era of unconventional warfare of the heated up Cold War, wrote to General Thomas White that the Air Force should have a full-size psychological warfare air command to be the equal of the Air Defense Command and the Tactical Air Command and the Strategic Air Command. So we've got a psychological warfare air command, we got an air defense command, we got a tactical air command, and then we have a strategic air command. He proposed that the problems of the Cold War were such that they should not be left to the normal forces, but should be dealt with by experts and by highly skilled men who would be in no position to apply and to utilize military strength and influence during the Cold War. And who's to say that someone's extremely highly skilled and an expert is the question. I would definitely have to say that what we got going on is definitely not expert, highly skilled, considering I battle and win every time. And you want to consider that air defense is the media, as in airwaves. He had particularly in mind psychological activities, but he also took into consideration the role of reconnaissance and other technological developments that are commonplace today. In other words, General Vandenberg was proposing that the military should get into the business which the CIA was working its way into and is in today to a considerable degree. In fact, to a degree that even General Vandenberg would have been appalled to witness now. The Air Force was not the only service thinking along these lines at the time. At Fort Gordon, Georgia, the Army was still very active with its civil affairs and military government school. Later, we shall look into some of the language of their doctrine and training manuals to see how influential these materials became later in the hands of ST. Not only at Fort George, but at Fort Bragg, the Army was nursing along the tiny detachment of special forces, which had all been but gone out of existence. However, by late 1949 and into the 1950s, these small first stirrings became major forces. Thus, these three things played into the hands of the CIA as it began to move into areas which it knew best, in which it could make moves unseen and unobserved by others in the government. The CIA was moving like spilled water. It was not exactly sure, of its course and direction, but it was following the line of least resistance, aided by its own law of gravity, which in this case was its banner-waving allegiance to the cause of anti-communism of any kind. By the late 40s, the Air Force had established by General Psychological Warfare Air Command, visualized by General Vandenberg, but other units known as Air Resupply and Communications Wings. These were very large organizations. They consisted of a variety of aircraft, all the way from small specialized light planes to the super bombers of World War II, the B-29s or the later versions, the B-50s. These mixed units had everything from flying capabilities on a global scale to printing presses and leaflet dispersal units. Once they created and shaken down during training exercise, they were deployed all over the world at such places as Clark Field near Manila, at Okinawa, Great Britain, and Libya. Did you get that? In the old days, they used leaflets and printing presses, and today they use social media influencers and the media, because back then the media was not available. Elements of these units became heavily involved in the Korean War, and specialized sections worked with the CIA all over Europe, the Middle East, and parts of Asia. Meaning, hey, let me just continue giving you propaganda. Don't think for yourself. Listen to me. Trust me. Okay. I want to be successful. Okay, you can be. But you got to do what I say. But nothing ever shifts. And you weigh 400 pounds. However, you look beautiful and big. However, you feel like crap. In accordance with the war planning practice, these wings had a wartime mission that was highly classified and infrequently discussed, save by those few who knew what it was. Because of the high classification of the mission of these units, something had to be said for their existence and why they seemed to be so busy when they had nothing officially to do. As a result, they became actively involved in a whole array of peacetime missions. They engaged in frequent military maneuvers and training exercises, and if there was an earthquake somewhere in a backward nation found itself with a major tragedy on its hands, a detachment from the wing would show up and begin the process of bringing in as much aid and assistance as could be arranged. Such activities became the cover for the wing and more or less explains its existence for those who did not know and did not need to know about the war plan requirement. The same was true of the Army Special Forces components. Their wartime mission was highly classified, yet they were a large organization and they had to have some cover reason to exist that would more closely tie them in with the rest of the parts. They took part in other exercises with NATO forces from Norway south to Greece, Turkey, Iran, and Pakistan. They added experienced manpower to disaster relief and to other underdeveloped nation building work. All these things resulted in a large, active, and consuming military organization. These big units all had to be funded, manned, and maintained by the military. In the days of real austerity, this created many problems, but because these units existed under heavy cover and secrecy, no one in the apartment parent services knew how to get to them to cut them back. Thus, they were sustained. Behind the scenes of the CIA smoothed out many of these problems, and this vast organization grew. The Korean War saved the day for all these activities, and for several years in the early 50s, there was money, manpower, and plenty to go around for all such units. It was such in this matter through the innocent appearing device of working with the military war planning staffs that the agency acquired a vast quantity of equipment, men, and base facilities all over the world. Even to the extent of major aircraft and other heavy equipment. Through the NSC directives stated and that the CIA could not create an organization to accomplish clandestine activities, and even through the president has said that the CIA must come to the council for any such equipment. The CIA managed to create a huge capability that cost them nothing and that was ready to do its bidding at the drop of a hat. Many have wondered how a small agency such as the CIA was in the late 40s could have been grown so fast and have had so much physical influence and impact upon foreign and military policies. It was the great military war plan and earmarked organization and all of the services which was used by the CIA quite innocently, and which gave its great unsuspected strength. As a matter of fact, the servicemen who became involved in the pseudo-military work enjoyed their special freedoms and the inevitable fun and games, influencers. Yes, I'll report that. Nevada. Great job, lawyer. Even if they did not participate in them, they had at least worked close to and in the aura of the big game. There were many, like General Vandenberg, the former DCI, who thought that the peacetime military forces should become much more proficient in this type of operation. And once they got into these organizations, they actively and eagerly supported their CIA counterparts. Many of these men accepted duty assignments with the CIA. These units all over the world became the havens for a large number of CIA cover assignment men. These CIA people served as military personnel easily in the pseudo-military units. This, too, was a significant departure from the original plans. It was eerily listening. It was early agreed that military intelligence experts would serve freely and voluntarily with the CIA. It was agreed early that military intelligence experts would serve freely and voluntarily, you millennial fools. Yeah! I want to be a boy, but I was born a girl because I was bullied. Okay. Do I get something in return? Sure. We'll make your page go viral. Okay, I'll do it. You mean you're going to hurt millions of Americans and you're perfectly aware of it, but it's more important for you to go viral? All right. You live in that trailer park. And from the beginning, a great number of jobs. Ooh, it was eerily. They volunteered with the CIA, and from the beginning, a great number of jobs, including many top-level key jobs, were assigned to active duty military personnel. As we have shown, CIA men served in the military by agreement in the war planning spaces, but it had never been visualized that hundreds of military men would serve with the CIA in its clandestine sections in order to work in support of such units as the Army Special Forces and the Air Force ARC wings. Nor was it ever envisioned that hundreds of CIA men would cross over into the military to serve with that line military units, such as these were supposed to be. Wow! Y'all are so smart. Thus, it was that while the fledgling agency was getting itself organized and while it was beginning to be able to perform some of its assigned functions, it was also laying the groundwork skillfully and in a major effort for the future when it would use the thousands of men in huge clandestine operations. Thousands, y'all. Thousands of men in huge clandestine operations such as the Bay of Pigs, the Indonesian support project, and eventually prelude to the South Vietnam nonsense. What had begun as a simple intelligence organization charged with the responsibility of coordinating all elements of the national intelligence community had become the center of a power system. This system, through secret and covert channels within the federal government structure, and beyond that into industry and the academic world, no crap, and the world of the media and publishing houses, holy shit, had developed a tremendous unseen infrastructure consistently primarily of the vast resources of the national military establishment all over the world. The Central Intelligence idea that had been born in the realization of the failures of World War II and in the post-War I world era became the precocious fledgling of the communist threat protagonists. Then the Central Intelligence Agency was more or less the caboose of the National Security Act of 1947, began gradually to work itself around to become the hand at the throttle of the greatest peacetime military power ever maintained by any great nation, a military force that had been emasculated and reduced to one of response, ever on the defense, and therefore ready for manipulation and control by an action group such as the Secret Team, yo! Holy Shazam! Pretty crazy. That's chapter 9 completion. I think I'm going to continue into chapter 10 because that's 20 minutes, and then I'm going to continue on saying, what is it? The woman of my word. Ooh. The Dulles Jackson Correa Report in Action, chapter 10. This is going to be good. Dulles, who manipulated a words book, which we uncovered in the last chapter, basically told you what he wanted you to hear to mind manipulate you into ideas around the CIA, and you all knew he worked for the CIA. So remember that video I posted on TikTok, right? It's exactly what they did. Oh my God, they want you to trust them. Another way of literally showing up for us. Great job, Democratic Party. Ha! You just throw it out and let us know everything. So awesome. I love it. The great significance of the thought and content of the National Security Act of 1947 can only be understood after a careful review of the emerging events of that period. We have already mentioned many of those great and growing pressures. One that was fundamental to that time was the idea of cybernetics, as propounded by the great Massachusetts Institute of Technology mathematician Wiener in his book in the name published in 1948. Norbert Wiener in his book of the name published in 1948, also known as Algorithms. Wiener, along with many others that worked during World War II to develop radar projectiles and methods of solving problems of fire control, principally in the employment of massed anti-aircraft weapons. Another segment of this scientific community was involved in the development of nuclear weapons and related activity. These two pioneering groups became greatly involved in the developing age of the computer. It is quite possible that the move from development of the atomic bomb to the creation of the thermonuclear hydrogen bomb would not have been achieved without the assistance of the advanced MANIAC computer and others that were being assembled. So for those of you who don't know, Colonel Prouty transmuted information from paper into the computer systems. Holy shit! It's all elementary crap though. You really want to get that. It's all like, okay, you're not that big of a deal. You were a baby at one point too, you know. You were a teenager who was sneaking out of their parents' window at some point too. However, you decided to feed the bad wolf instead of the good wolf, and now we're in some toxic spaces, and so there's no reason for you to be afraid. Screw them. Self-empowerment. Make your own decisions. And if you make the wrong ones, you're going to hell. And that makes me happy. See, a lot of you, they will feed off your sympathy. That's called gaslighting. That's called narcissistic behavior, and it's manipulation. Oh, I'm so sorry. It'll never happen again. Charm, 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 charm. Wham! I digress. Let's get back to this book. This nonfiction, which is truthful. A 31-year CIA agent or veteran or whatever for the government. As a result of the strategic role played by so many brilliant, though perhaps overly specialized men, there was a great overlap in the field of strategic planning involving the conventional military professionals, political leaders, and these advanced scientists. The military men of that time believed that they held the key to the control of neutralization of the world because they had just completed the destruction of the forces of Japan and Germany in the greatest of all wars, and because they had sole possession of the atomic bomb and its means of delivery over great distances and had been demonstrated at Hiroshima and Nagasaki. On the other hand, the politicians, recognizing the unmatched power of this country, looked ahead with a certain magnanimity. There's that word again, magnanimity. Magnanimity. Upon the long-sought era of world peace, which seemed to be within reach if they could but continue the one world post-war climate of exhausted euphoria, which any great victory begins. Humble. You're working with people that are working for their government. Meaning, those people came here. It's like, God, you're so stupid. Meanwhile, the scientists who were much closer to a true realization of the facts of the situation saw that this was no time to relax. They knew, if others were unwilling to admit it to themselves, that nuclear supremacy was not permanent and that there was no way to make it so unless the United States was willing to dedicate itself to the difficult, costly, and tasks of moving ahead. One group of scientists felt very strongly that the atomic bomb was a sufficient ultimate weapon, that this country should dedicate itself to the manufacture of more and better atomic weapons until a stockpile of incontestable superiority had been obtained. This goal, positively and technically attainable, meant that this country would have to continue its nuclear production at a wartime pace, or fast the chance that Russia and some other country might surpass it within the next critical decade. Although the goal of these scientists was the lesser of the two general proposals, it was not an easy one. The supremacy was not assured without great effort. Other scientists insisted that the only way in which this country could maintain its leadership in the great nuclear race was to drive directly in the mysterious of the thermonuclear weapon. These scientists, who could not guarantee ultimate success in a venture so difficult, maintained that even the shreds of hope which their experience held out to them were so important that if some other country solved the secrets of the fusion explosion before we did, it would from that time on wrest world power leadership from us. The thought of doing both simultaneously was almost beyond comprehension, and a great struggle raged within all three worlds: political, scientific, and military. Needless to say, with such grave matters under consideration, the traditionally normal concepts of diplomacy and military policy had been outmoded almost overnight. Diplomats, long accustomed to the fine points of balance of power and to the value of alliances, were faced with the fact that there was no such thing as a balance of power, even if all of the rest of the world's nations were to be balanced against a nuclear superpower. In the years from 1946 to 1947, the world power pecking order within the United States, number 2 on the list, was almost immaterial. The same situation of shattered tradition faced the military army generals who had just driven their forces over the remnants of the once great German army, refused even to think of how they would deploy forces against an enemy equipped with nuclear weapons. Just to let you know, even in that moment I went, well, they're still great. No, they weren't. Did you not realize that they were killing innocent human beings? They weren't great. They didn't use their minds, and if they went against the government, they would be persecuted. However, they were mind manipulated into believing they would go into people's towns and abuse Jewish people. All of them. Nobody fought against it, except for a couple and a few that they're rarely talked about, because that's how secret it is. It was years before the senior war colleges would even permit a nuclear annex to be included in their master war plans. There's still underlining dirt when it comes to this discussion, by the way. Somewhere in the flux of all of these ideas and great conflicts, there began to grow a fear, a real national dread of the potential of the enemy. Who would gain the atomic bomb first? In those early days, it was not even necessary to put a name on that country that might loom up over the horizon armed with the bomb. That was the enemy, and that nation would be the ultimate enemy of all enemies of all time. And along with the idea, wouldn't it be funny if we all just turned Jew? It just seems like there's a lot of Jewish people out there. What if we all just turned Jewish? It'd be like total like, ha ha. Because they believe in God, they don't believe in Jesus technically, right? Just saying. And along with the idea came the play on the threat. Ooh, a threat. Y'all are so crazy, man. Those who believe that our only road to salvation lay in greater stockpiling of atomic bombs, those who argue that it must be the hydrogen bomb, and those few who said it was must be both, all perhaps without common intent began to create the idea of the enemy threat. It was coming. It was inevitable. Ooh, God is your inevitable threat when you claim to worship him. Interesting. The things that would have been done since the period, ooh, God, y'all's teeth hurt. The things that have been done since the period in the name of the anti-enemy would make a list that in dollars alone would have paid for all the costs of civilization up to that time with money to spare. Wow, you're wasting our money. Such an enemy is not unknown. Man has feared this type of enemy before. It is a human, and more than that, it is a social trait. All a social trait. To dread the unknown enemy. This enemy is defined in one context as the Manichaean devil. Norbert Weiner says the Manichaean devil is an opponent, like any other opponent who is determined on victory and will use any trick of craftiness or dissimulation to obtain his victory. Oh yeah. Will do anything of trickery and craftiness or dissimulation to obtain his victory. In particular, he will keep his policy of confusion secret. This is a really good chapter. And if we show any signs of beginning to discover his policy, he will change it in order to keep us in the dark. The great truth about this type of enemy is that he is stronger when he is imagined and feared than when he is real. One of man's greatest sources of fear is lack of information. To live effectively, one must have adequate information. It was in the great conflict of the National Security Act in 1947 was brewed. A man's demand for information pervaded and surmounted almost every other move he made. Oh, I don't really give a crap. Let her do whatever the hell she wants. Okay, well, this is what you get. I just don't even look. I just don't even ask. That's the new man relationship with a female, however they're married. I just trust her. You go ahead and continue trusting her. Easy, you're easy. That's the great machine was created. That's how the women are doing this. All of the resources of this country were poured into a single Department of defense against the great Manichaean devil, which was looming up over the steppes of Russia with the formula of the atomic bomb in one hand and the policy of world communism in the other. I just want to be picked. Oh. The chosen one? They don't even get that the chosen one is God choosing me. God chose me. Our statesmen foresaw the Russian detonation of the atomic bomb in 1949 and the concurrent acceleration toward the hydrogen bomb as soon as thereafter as possible. So they created the Atomic Energy Commission in January of 1947, and then the Defense Department in September of 1947, and gave them both the eyes and ears of the CIA to provide the essential information that at that time was really the paramount and highest priority. The CIA was ordered to achieve both goals, the second to none atomic bomb stockpile and the hydrogen bomb, and the DoD was ordered to create the global force that would defend his country against the giant of the Soviet Union on all other nuclear powers. But I want the God to choose me, but only if I can abuse another woman, is what they say. Look at how hot I am, duckface. Let me seduce my baby and molest him on camera. That guy's going to choose me. And then when I get the guy, I'm going to abuse him. Because it's all about me, yo. And then I'm going to abuse the fans and followers as much as I can to make them jealous of look what I got. However, I'm mean as shit to him. And I would humiliate him at a drop of a hat if he did me wrong. That's the truth. This then created its own great machinery to fight this great and mostly unknown devil. It was unnecessary to create a truly defense establishment which would have the ability to spring up against attack of any kind, of any nature, and from any place. It was to be truly a massive machine. That's why they went to Australia. Defense with no special or polite. Defense with no social or polite term to be held up like a banner in order with the rest of the world might believe in the United States was forever denouncing the use of force and therefore forever denouncing that paramount doctrine of military strategy and power of the offensive. Clueless. This was the real thing. Defense was to be defense, and the national defense establishment was to be the greatest force we could create and maintain for just that purpose. This meant that the military policy of the United States was to become more like a concept of a chess player than that of the brilliant tactician. Everything was done to guard against making a mistake that would give the alert adversary that advantage that would enable him to defeat the defender. Thus, the chess player is governed more by his worst moments than by his best moments. Little did they know that I'm authentic as can be. And I'm literally defending the good people. And there's more good people out there than bad people. However, they tried to create it as if I was a bad person, painting the narrative to act as if I'm attacking the good people when I'm literally defending them. Sometimes the voices you listen to are so damn loud that I have to scream at you. Let me in. Listen to me. I'm telling you what they're doing to you, and I care about you. I hear you. Listen. Oh yeah, sorry. Shit, I cannot believe I did that again. I know, but you have to be like malleable. And you have to allow me to be what God needs me to be, because not everybody is hearing me either. I'm definitely awake right now. However, that person isn't. And so this is where community comes in. How am I going to hold space for this person who is what you would occur as being yelled at, but really what it is being, wake up girl, wake up boy. Let me stop for a minute and take a look. Maybe there's something in this for me to learn to where I get to be a leader too. Like the guy who made the video about something that I made. Can't remember what was it about. They're trying to get me to forget, which is another example of the power trip of the CIA. It was a movie clip, but I can't remember what it was. Or even the guy with the homelessness. That's an example of empowering your community, showing honest truths, and he backs it up with evidence. So as you can see, this is not a one-woman show, yo. This is an opportunity for everyone in their own purpose, definite purpose, to rise in awareness, grounded in self-awareness, with assistance and be of service, with the potential to create a pathway for a career for yourself that will light you up with excitement. Raising all the good people through the strain, uncovering the evil bullshit, right? And then creating a new earth where we have solid standing ground. Not everybody wants to be a millionaire, but we do want to be able to buy a pair of pants. We want to buy tires when we need tires. We want to take one trip a year. We want to live peacefully and comfortably. We don't want to make a YouTube video. We don't want to have a social media account where we have millions of followers. And we also don't want to be filmed on the street inappropriately and not be told it's not against the law for me to film you. This is the law, and this is how you operate within the law. What can I say? Well, I have civil rights, and this is my personal space, and I'm telling you, if you film me, I will be suing your ass. And just to let you know, I didn't even comb my hair today. Okay, moving on. Thus, the chess player is governed more by his worst moments than by his best moments. That is part of the plan. The worst calamities of defense policy since 1947 have been those resulting from being caught off guard, such as the Korean War and the Sputnik period. Then the entire nation felt endangered by the stark realization that the Soviet Union had launched an orbiting body before we had. Who cares? Literally, why can't we just work together? That's the crazy part of all this. It's like, you got a smart guy here and a smart guy here and a smart guy here. And then in the past life, y'all used to work together. Maybe in this life, you should look at the fact that it's not even about the country that does it, but it's about the movement and growth of us as an evolution in society. That's how selfish these politicians are. They want to occur a certain way for themselves, for history. The realization resulted in the creation of a defense establishment machine like that proposed by Dr. W. Ross Ashby and recountered by Weiner. It was a great unpurposeful random mechanism which seeks for its own purpose through a process of learning. Such a machine is designed to avoid certain pitfalls of breakdowns, look for purpose which it can fulfill. These brief quotes taken from men who were writing and lecturing during the period are now most prophetic. Not only was this monstrous machine created for the defense of the U.S., but it was so established that it has been looking for purpose it could fulfill. In other words, this great defense establishment was ready to go, looking for opportunity, and all it needed was to have someone throw the switch and give a little direction. The evidence of this exists in the beginnings made by the agency with its participation. It volunteered in the war planning functions of the major overseas military commands, especially in Europe. This war planning work led to the stockpiling of considerable amounts of war-making material and marked for the CIA and stored in military warehouses, both real and cover units, all over the world. These supplies could be called out whenever the CIA had any requirement, even at a time when the NSC thought it had the CIA well under control because they had prohibited it from having men, equipment, and facilities for operational purposes. This was the start. The agency worked itself into key positions within the defense establishment and then orchestrating its data inputs to create highly classified requirements. It began to develop great power within the U.S. government and around the world. The year 1950 was an important one for the CIA. Again, all the pieces began to fall into all the right slots. First of all, the war in Korea began on June 25th, and although the intelligence community and CIA and all was caught unprepared for the attack, just as it had been years before at Pearl Harbor, the failure of national intelligence to assist with such a major prediction spotlighted that must be done in the United States wherever to have a worthwhile intelligence capability. While the war was getting underway and the U.S. armed forces were picking themselves up off the mat, almost as they had to do after the attacks on Pearl Harbor, Truman looked around for a stronger man to pull the agency together and to give it a sense of mission. Meanwhile, strong agency proponents argued that the fault had not been on the CIA. On the contrary, they attempted to show if the president had been briefed properly on a daily basis by the CIA, as the Dulles-Jackson-Correa report had recommended, he would have known that the attack was imminent. This was an important recommendation of the Dulles-Jackson-Correa report, and these activities took this opportunity to promote the issue at the cost of the incumbent DCI and his military-dominated staff. It should be recalled that if the Truman's refusal to deal directly with the intelligence arm, but to have them instead brief the NSC and then to make his cabinet members responsible for him keeping informed, that stirred up this issue in the first place. This was continuing evidence of the old fight between those who saw intelligence as the primary force of the government, responsible only to the president, and those who believed that the function of intelligence was to keep the president and his cabinet informed in the true staff sense. Both of these views were made more at odds with each other by the pressures generated by the Manichaean devil syndrome. The U.S. Embassy to Moscow for several years preceding the Korean War had been General Eisenhower's old chief of staff, the brilliant and tough Walter Beadle Smith. He was very qualified by his World War II experience with Eisenhower for a major assignment. In a special sense, he was well qualified to become the new DCI by virtue of the fact that he had been to Moscow for so long. So many of the intelligence clan had been exploiting the cause of anti-communism for so long that it seemed that bringing in the man who really ought to know at first hand what communism was all about would be the best move to counteract those who were saying that the administration was soft on communism. As we look back at this appointment, we have forgotten the great crisis which had been stirred up by Senator Joe McCarthy over the issue of communists being everywhere. There was no small issue, and the appointment of a man was as highly regarded as General Smith was an ideal choice. In spite of this, the McCarthy movement swept him up in its fervor. Soon after his appointment, he was called to appear before McCarthy's committee, and in response to a question as to whether he thought there were communists in government, especially in that CIA, had replied to the effect that he thought it was quite possible that there were communists in the CIA. This statement was a real shocker, and it made instant headlines. At that time, and in the special context of those days, was the most amazing statement, whether it was factual or not. The general had been the DCI for only a brief time, and he was more or less excused for the statement on the grounds that he had not had time to really know the agency. For any other man but General Smith in that position and at that time to have given a similar reply would have resulted in having him ridden out of town by the rabid McCarthyists. Smith replaced Admiral Hillenkoetter who had been DCI since the days of the Central Intelligence Group, before the agency had been created, the failure of the CIA to give proper warning of the probable, or at least highly possible, North Korean attacks, and his failure to evaluate the nature and strength of the attack may well have been contributing factors in hurrying President Truman's decision to replace Hillenkoetter. He had done this duty and played his role as the script was written. He had been charged with running a military-type CIA, and he had just that. The brief encounters that the agency had in such places as Greece, Iran, and along the perimeter of the Iron Curtain were simply post-war OSS-type games, and they never amounted to very much. However, there were one major characteristics of the CIA operational efforts during Hillenkoetter's time that began to change with the Smith era. During its first years, when the CIA did something anti-communist, it was something done against the real communists. For example, the fighting in Greece was involved Bulgarians, Yugoslavians, and Romanians. All of the work the CIA did along the Iron Curtain and in Greece and Iran was directly concerned with close and tangible Russian influence. In those days, the CIA did not go to the Congo or the Philippines to seek out the subversive influences they then called communists. The CIA worked nose to nose against the Russians wherever they found them in reality. This point cannot be underscored too heavily. Most of the CIA clandestine efforts since 1955 have been against supposed communist or subversive communism or some third country target. In other words, the communism the CIA finds and goes after in its operational efforts during more recent years has been that which it finds on the soil of non-communist countries. In the beginning, the skirmishes of the Cold War were fought on or near real communist territory. Since that time, communism had been fought on the soil of our own circle of friends. In such countries as Vietnam, Laos, India, the Congo, and the Dominican Republic, to name a few. This change in the focus and direction of the pursuit of communism is important, and at that time, General Smith became the director of Central Intelligence. In October of 1950, events in Korea looked very bad. The greatest military power in the world, only 5 years earlier, was being pushed into the sea near the southern tip of the Korean peninsula, and the CIA shared a certain amount of the blame with the military establishment. Smith moved suddenly to put an end to the bad image of the agency. One of the first things he found in his files was the Dulles-Jackson-Correa report on January 1st, 1949. It had been gathering dust and had resulted in very little effective change. Because you can write as many bills as you want, but if you don't do the work behind them, it's just propaganda. It's just, look at me, I'm doing so much. And then you assume they do the work. Oh, let me just take some of that money. Billions of dollars, Newsom. It had been gathering dust and had resulted in very little effective change. This had not been because of the language of the report. It was tremendous. It attacked that it thought was wrong without hesitation. It made firm recommendations for the changes it sponsored. However, because the men it had attacked so vehemently had been in a position to bottle it up, nothing it recommended had been accomplished. General Smith took the report out, and when he had read it, he got on the phone and called William H. Jackson. He asked him to leave his business and come to Washington at once. Jackson, who had already devoted much of his life to intelligence service, came immediately with his appointed the deputy director of Central Intelligence, Smith. Dialed the phone again and called the prestigious law firm of Sullivan and Cromwell in New York City and asked for Allen Dulles. You're under arrest for killing a gopher. Whatever it was. This is to my Amish dude who killed a gopher, prairie dog, and did it for fun because he didn't like them. And he makes tiny houses very well too, by the way. And him and his family or brothers are very good at making tiny houses. And I would like to appoint him as the lead tiny house maker for the Californians or the homeless people, wherever he chooses, as one person to be the plan maker for tiny houses for the homeless, which was a purposeful meeting between the two of us, him and myself, And I want one for free because I want to attach it to the back of my truck or car, and I want to drive it when I do the book tour with Gary. Or we get a motorhome, I'm not really sure. But I still want a tiny house. In short order, he had Dulles in the field as Chief of Foreign Operations. There was no official explanation of what the duties of the Foreign Operations section were, but it would take little imagination to figure them out. Then he called another old friend, Murray McConnell, and asked him to come to Washington to be his Deputy Director for Administration. In a busy 6 months of the CIA had become reasonably well organized and reported 4 strong deputies: Deputy Director Intelligence, Deputy Director Administration, Deputy Director Support, Logistics in the broadcast sense, and Deputy Director Plans, Clandestine Operations, the fun and games side of the house. Meanwhile, Smith began to put into effect the functional proposals of the Dulles Mein Kampf. He was amazed to learn that the Director OPC, Office of Policy Coordination, was not his man, but was tied up in the bureaucratic red tape device prescribed by NSCID 10-2 and intended by the Council to keep him from running free into the arena of clandestine operations. When General Smith learned that his important deputy was appointed by the Secretary of State and recorded by the Secretary of Defense, he went right to the root of the problem. He called the Secretary of State and then the Secretary of Defense and informed them that from that date on, the Director of OPC was to be under his own control, and that if they had any objections, that they were welcome to talk with him about them. If either one had objections in the heat of messy war in Korea, he kept them to himself. From that date on, the CIA had its own clandestine operations division throughout. It was still required by law to remain out of the business until directed by the NSC to develop an operation. The CIA had made various minor incursions into the special operations field during the late 40s, but all of them were carefully phrased and generally submitted to the NSC for approval in strict compliance with the law and the provisions of NSCID 10-2. Now that the DCI was in control of the Special Operations section, he felt that it was his to use as he saw fit. This move was very timely. It would have done little good for him to have gained the clandestine staff if he had possessed no resources in the form of military men, equipment, and faculties that had gradually been laid at his disposal as a result of the tedious years of war planning. However, just as this took over the OPC, Office of Policy Coordination, he found that the CIA had access to a vast military organization in the Army and Air Force, and that he would have very little trouble using the exigencies of the war in Korea as an excuse to put into motion certain large and important special operations in this country. These operations were directed at Taiwan, Okinawa, and the Philippines, in addition to Japan and Korea, and led to the development of agency interests in all of Southeast Asia. There were other similar moves made during this period as emerging ST began to make itself felt in Asia as it had been in Europe. It should be recalled that General Donovan of OSS fame had been the ambassador to Thailand, and that he was followed by the former ambassador to Greece, John Purfoy. Both men went, of course, CIA-type operators, and it was their expertise and that accounts for so much of the relationship that has been existed in Thailand during the past 20 years. Now that we've got that taken care of, we all make mistakes. We all get abused by an animal at some point and have a reason for the things we do. And some animals are evil. Like the orca whales, which will be in extinction. Literally watching a dog play with an orca while the orca is attempting the dog to get in the water so the orca will eat it while the person films. It's like, are you kidding me? Noting the narrative that is being portrayed with the orca. The orca are abusive. They mind game manipulate you into thinking they're amazing based on how they look. And then they are out for revenge for those of you that have done evil things to them in the SeaWorld scenario. So you just remember that when you're swimming with the orcas and you're trying to keep them here. I don't think so. Orcas will be extinct. They're Tyrannosaurus Rex. They do not care about nothing but themselves.